Have you ever wondered about the profound significance of the mythological motif where a sun god overthrows his father god, cleaves the primordial dragon, and rebuilds the world from its remains? This act of casting a blemish is a prerequisite for all creation. Here we encounter two archetypal motifs that often appear together in creation myths. Without the slaying of the old parents, their renunciation and neutralization, there can be no beginning. Let's delve into the matter of parenticide, which, of course, involves feelings of guilt. The sun's liberation from the Ouroboros, the ancient symbol of a serpent or dragon eating its tail, begins with an act that seems negative, an act of destruction. Its psychological interpretation allows us to understand the symbolic nature of masculinity that lies at the root of consciousness. We describe the maturity of a young person into independence and freedom as a process of self-division. To become self-aware, to be conscious at all, begins with refusal towards the Ouroboros, the mighty mother, and the subconscious. When we examine the deeds on which consciousness and ego are initially built, they are negative acts. To overthrow, to separate oneself from the environment are the primeval acts of consciousness. While the subconscious strives to unite everything under it, ego consciousness is capable of separating itself from this primal unity and giving itself freedom. The formation of the ego can only develop by separating itself from what is not ego. Consciousness only appears when it separates itself from what is unconscious, and the individual reaches individuation when he realizes he is different from the collective. Breaking the original Ouroboros state leads to a distinction in duality, which leads to the decombination of the original ambivalence, the division of the hermaphrodite, and the splitting of the world into object and subject, inside and outside, and the creation of good and evil that can be distinguished with the destruction of the Ouroboros garden, paradise, where opposites lay side by side. Naturally, the moment a person becomes self-aware and attains an ego, he feels himself separate from the world because he contains within him another mighty side that opposes the process of developing consciousness. This means that as long as his ego has not matured, he will always find himself with doubt that can lead to despair and even suicide and self-mutilation, whose implications are always the murder of the ego reaching its peak with its death in the mighty mother. Until the maturing ego hardens itself and is able to stand on its feet, which will only be possible after a successful battle with the dragon, it will remain insecure. This insecurity comes from the internal split into two opposing psychic systems, which are the conscious system with which the ego identifies, still weak and underdeveloped, and vague regarding the meaning of its specific principle, and the unconscious system. The overestimation of the ego as a symptom of childish consciousness is compensated by a self-destructive and depressive tendency in the form of Weltschmerz and self-hatred that often peaks in suicide, all of which are characteristic of adolescence. An analysis of this stage reveals to us the source of transpersonal guilt, which is beyond personal, meaning it is there before the development of personality. This terrible act of separating the parents of the world appears as original guilt. But this guilt comes from the parents of the world. The unconscious itself is what makes this guilt, and not the ego. As the representative of the ancient law, the unconscious, the Ouroboros mother, fights hard to prevent the release of her son, ego consciousness, and therefore we again find ourselves with the mighty mother who wants to kill the son. As long as the conscious ego bows to these guilts and accepts the death sentence, it still behaves like the sun lover and like him will end by self-destruction. As we journey through the complex labyrinth of mythology, we discover the intricate layers of human consciousness and the eternal struggle between the known and the unknown, the conscious and the unconscious, the ego and the collective.